an active government that does support you, then therefore you do probably have some rights, you have some representation. We think those things can get a lot worse. This looks like when Kat says that, oh, there's difference in occupation and annexation. Good. We want these countries to stay occupied. We think it's bad if they get annexed. Jack gave you mechanisms as to why that is likely to happen. We beat opening government because Jack gives you 5 characterizations that are never responded to as to why you are never going to get the revolution which OG's analysis depends on for them to get any impact. We beat our closing government because Jack gives unresponded to rebuttal that is never rebuilt in WIP as to why terror is worse on their side, and their only mechanism as to how terror is bad and therefore you actually have more stability or you have less stability inside up is out of this debate. I think it's quite telling that in top half and largely in closing government, there's no real examples used and there's no real characterization of what colonies look like status quo. I think at the point at which Jack tells you exactly what colonies looks like, he tells you exactly what has happened in Ireland, what has happened in Hong Kong, what has happened in French Guinea. Even if these don't all fit the characteristics of what an occupied territory is, it does fulfill the mechanism of what happens when you try and revolt against a much more powerful country. 3 parts to it, even though I've already explained why we're winning from Jack's speech. Firstly, closing government. Secondly, opening government. Third of all, our case. Closing government. They say an occupation is different from an annexation. We think this doesn't really matter in this debate. We think, or we think, as long as we're standing on the, I think in both sides, even if you are not fully a part of Russia, for example, like Crimea, and you are merely only like occupied, for example, French Guinea or Puerto Rico, where you're not actually a part of the wider country, you are considered its own colonial territory. We think our mechanisms still stand. They then give 4 reasons why extremists get worse on our side of the house. I'm going to take all of these down and take CG out. First of all, they're going to hugely react because they're unhappy. First of all, we tell you that they are likely to do this anyway. The reason for this, because they are still unhappy with leaders, because the leader is taking place of a colonial power in the sense that they are being, even in their best case scenario, on side gov, your leader that they talk about is still taking the seat as the envoy towards the colonial power. They're still taking the seat in a parliament set up by the colonial power. So this resistance group, even if you try to start up some instability, they're still not going to be happy with you. Second thing they say is that it is easier to push rebels around at the point at which you are encouraging instability. This is not true. Jack tells you at the point at which you are encouraging instability, you are giving them a license and you are legitimizing their actions. So it means instead of saying, oh, we'll just start a riot, they'll say, oh, our leader said we can start a riot. Well, then let's start a riot, but also set up a bomb in another area. The next thing they say is that this resistance will likely blow up food and aid. Listen, this resistance group still needs popular support. They're never going to do that. The next thing they say is that there's going to be no concessions because now it is seen as you can't control you can't control your population, you can't control these individuals. But recognize on your side of the house, even though you are in CG's best case scenario, like manipulating these terrorist groups, you are still not going to be able to have any legitimacy because it still seems like you can't control the population. Then they say it's effective resistance for 2 reasons. First of all, you can't really collaborate. I think Jack's framing a response to that at the point at which he says that even if you aren't going to collaborate, that doesn't matter. The colonial power still stands. But next they say that you make them look bad on the world stage. Listen, Jack's framing says that if optics had mattered, then like in the 70s and 80s or post-World War II, when the UN was cracking down on any form of colonialism, then they would have stopped at that point. I think at the point at which no one is really going to care, because if French Guinea starts uprising and France cracks it down, France just looks like it's pursuing law and order in their own area. On their way, if they say security is more important, we agree, we get that. Opening government, POI.
Yeah, a lot of people would prefer the death penalty over life in prison. The reason is because life in and of itself is not an absolute good, even with financial benefits, which is why—
Thank you. I'm going to weigh that. You gave your analysis on that. Okay. First of all, they opening government say, in terms of direct engagement, they say that your occupiers and your leaders, you're able to actually get concessions out of them by starting a resistance. First of all, recognize that Jack's framing takes this out of the debate. At the point which, first of all, he says that the occupier's power is way larger because that army has already overpowered your army. So if your army was ineffective in the initial colonization, then why would it be effective decades past? Second of all, he says that the decades that passed, the occupiers likely consolidated their power. Third of all, most countries have already given up most of their territories, so therefore the territories that still exist are likely the ones you had an iron grip on, so that not even international pressure could take you out. Fourth of all, he says you're likely to see it as a you're likely to see any resistance as a threat to either your homeland or a threat to you seeming powerful. So this looks like if Taiwan started uprising again, Xi Jinping is going to crack down because he doesn't want to be seen as weak. Fifth of all, he says that the leaders are likely to have just be a proxy government in most of these cases, so they're not actually going to have the connections to these resistance groups that matters. So this means that all of their analysis about how you can actually get benefits, even if the resistance is slightly stronger, it doesn't matter. Why is the case about losing agency is worse than death? Why is that ridiculous? First of all, we tell you how you get more agency because you have less freedom on their side of the house. Second of all, we think if these individuals aren't mobilized anyway, then the individuals that opening government talk about have already made a trade-off and already care more about stability. Third of all, we think if their analysis was true, then instead of just 20% of the Hong Kong population doing peaceful protests, then 100% of the Hong Kong population would enter into like suicide marches where they'd literally like attack the Chinese government with all their might. But clearly, within their identification, most people, even if they want some resistance, they don't want to do enough that they'll actually die. So their analysis about agency doesn't stand. What do we tell you uniquely in this debate? We tell you specifically there are 4 reasons as to why you are likely to have how the occupiers react worse. First of all, they want to deter any future resistance, so they send in the troops because they want to look weak. Second of all, they crack down on free speech and apps, so it means you can't actually talk. Third of all, they're likely to annex you because they don't want any trouble, because they just want stability. Fourth of all, even if they don't annex you, they're likely to just replace you with a new proxy government. This is the biggest impact. It's more plausible. It outweighs anything in this debate. I gave you my path to winning at the start. Thank you.
We thank the opposition whip and all speakers in the debate. Please